Welcome back to the deep dive. You sent us a truly fascinating stack of sources this time.
It's an incredible story.
It really is. It details the operations of a company that is somehow both a pretty recent market entrant and at the same time one of the most powerful names in global medicine. We're talking about a powerhouse that is, completely redefined what aggressive growth looks like in the pharmaceutical world.
It's an incredible case study, really, in scale, speed, and strategic financial maneuvering. When you look at the sheer market footprint of AbbVie Inc., it's hard to believe it only became a public entity just over a decade ago.
Right.
It feels like this established giant, but it's still relatively new, and that newness is, I think, key to understanding its strategy. Our mission today is to really pull apart this corporate entity.
Go beyond the press releases.
Exactly. Move past the glossy press releases and understand the three core dynamics that define it. How they built their initial multi-billion-dollar empire on blockbuster drugs and are now managing a massive, massive transition. Then there's their aggressive, almost industrial-scale mergers and acquisitions model, their M&A model. And finally, the significant legal pricing and governmental scrutiny that really shadows every single billion-dollar deal they make.
Exactly. We're talking about an American pharmaceutical company headquartered in North Chicago, Illinois. And when we call them a giant, we are not exaggerating. I mean, the sources confirm they are ranked the 6th largest biomedical company globally by revenue.
6th largest.
This
Yeah.
isn't some small-time player. They are sitting comfortably at 77th on the Fortune 500 and 108th on the Forbes Global 2000. I mean, that's staggering influence across the entire corporate landscape, not just pharma.
And we really have to start with the origin story because it explains the unique DNA they have. AbbVie was officially formed in 2012 as a corporate spinoff from Abbott Laboratories.
Right.
It became a fully public, standalone entity in January 2013. Now, corporate spinoffs are common, but this one was just monumental. Abbott basically separated its research-based pharmaceutical division, the high-risk, high-reward drug discovery unit, from its more stable, broader medical device and diagnostics business.
So they were born, fully formed as a pure-play pharmaceutical powerhouse, instantly focused on life sciences and therapeutics. I always find the naming conventions in pharma so fascinating.
They're very deliberate.
They are. They try to capture both science and aspiration. And here's a great little nugget for you, the listener. The name AbbVie is a neat blend. They took Ab from the former parent, Abbott, and then added V, which is a reference to the Latin root for life.
It's clever.
It's a very clean way to signal their purpose, but as we're about to see, that high-minded purpose sometimes conflicts with the aggressive business reality we're about to unpack.
And that aggressive reality, it requires management on a truly global scale. I mean, this is a company that has to manage operations across over 170 countries worldwide. It employs 55,000 people. Wow.
We should also note the leadership structure, which has defined the company's trajectory since it was founded. Richard A. Gonzalez has been a defining figure. He's currently the chairman. However, there was a pretty recent transition in the top seat. Robert Michael took over as CEO in June 2024.
So a new chapter.
A new chapter, yeah. But the established growth framework, the one Gonzalez was so instrumental in building, that remains the central operating principle.
And that growth framework is what we need to jump into now because it all starts with the financials and, specifically the blockbusters. This deep dive is going to focus heavily on what is probably the highest stakes transition a pharmaceutical company can face.
Oh, absolutely.
That shift from depending on one massive revenue pillar to a diversified portfolio, it's like a near-death experience, financially speaking, for any company that fails it.
The financials are the essential foundation here. They explain AbbVie's aggressive strategy in both R&D and M&A. When you looked at the 2024 data, we see total revenue hitting $56.33 billion US.
$56 billion. Just think about that number. That's a revenue stream so colossal that it allows them to immediately absorb a multi-billion-dollar acquisition or a major legal settlement without even flinching, which is exactly what we'll get into later. Their operating income for 2024 was also huge, $9.137 billion.
That's incredible.
This financial gravity, it dictates their place in the industry, and it enables the kind of risk-taking you need for pharma growth.
And when you trace how they built that foundation, one name just absolutely dominates the conversation.
Humira,
adalimumab. For years, Humira was the quintessential pharmaceutical blockbuster. It was an antibody injection approved for a massive range of autoimmune diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, plaque psoriasis, you name it. It was basically a Swiss Army knife for inflammation.
It was more than a blockbuster. For a long time, it was the biggest selling drug in the world, routinely pulling in over $20 billion a year at its peak. This one drug, this single drug, was the financial engine of the newly formed AbbVie.
Right.
What's incredible is its staying power. Even in 2024, after it had already begun facing biosimilar competition in the U.S. market, which started in January 2023, even after that, Humira still generated a massive $9 billion in revenue.
$9 billion. Still.
That's 16% of their total revenue.
Like, I need to pause on that $9 billion figure. That is a gigantic revenue stream. But the key phrase you just mentioned is biosimilar competition. For the listener who might not track pharma that closely, can you quickly explain the difference? What's a biosimilar versus a generic? And why was Humira's patent cliff in 2023 such a massive corporate event?
That's a crucial distinction, yeah. So generics are chemically identical to small molecule drugs. Think aspirin or Tylenol, simple stuff. Biosimilars, however, are for large biologic drugs like Humira, which are made in living systems, usually cell cultures.
So they're more complex.
Much more complex. Because they're complex proteins, they can't be perfectly replicated. So a biosimilar is a highly similar version with no clinically meaningful difference from the original. The term patent cliff is the pharma industry's, let's say, euphemism for when the primary patents protecting a major drug expire.
A very gentle word for a disaster.
Right. It allows these cheaper competitors, biosimilars in this case, to flood the market. And when you lose $10 or $15 billion in revenue almost overnight, it's a terrifying financial drop.
So the clock has been ticking loudly on that $9 billion revenue stream, which is exactly why the focus has shifted entirely to its successors. They had to transition smoothly to maintain that multi-billion-dollar cash flow, and the sources show they have executed a brilliant dual-track replacement strategy.
Absolutely. The main successor is Skyrizi, or risankizumab. Skyrizi is also an autoimmune treatment, but it uses a more targeted mechanism. It's an interleukin-23, or IL-23 inhibitor.
So it's more precise.
Exactly. It specifically blocks the signaling pathway of IL-23, which is a key driver of inflammation in diseases like psoriasis and Crohn's. The whole strategy here is better efficacy and a potentially cleaner side effect profile than the last generation.
And that better efficacy is translating directly into revenue. Skyrizi is now the company's clear powerhouse. In 2024, it brought in a staggering $11.7 billion in revenue.
$11.7 billion.
That's 21% of their total revenue. It has effectively taken Humira's crown as the primary revenue generator in just a few short years, which is just an incredible feat of both R&D and marketing.
And following close behind is the second track of that replacement strategy, Rinvoq, or upadacitinib. It primarily treats arthritis, and it's a different class of drug, a JAK inhibitor. Rinvoq generated a solid $6 billion in 2023 revenue.
Another 11%.
Right, 11% of the total. And this dual-pronged strategy is critical for risk mitigation. They didn't just develop one successor, they developed a strong duo. It ensures that if Skyrizi faced unexpected regulatory hurdles or market issues, Rinvoq could step up and provide, revenue insurance built right into their R&D strategy.
So that covers the critical autoimmune pillar. But what's equally interesting is the deliberate diversification beyond that core. And a lot of it was achieved through those massive M&A deals we're going to cover in the next section. The acquisition of Allergan in particular brought a critical, reliable aesthetic and neuroscience component that is wildly different from their core focus.
And that means Botox, which is a massive, reliable cash cow. It generated $6 billion in 2024 revenue, matching Rinvoq at 11% of total revenue.
It's almost funny. When you think about a pharmaceutical company, you might not immediately think of the cosmetic giant that defined a generation of anti-aging treatments.
But that cash flow is crucial. And Botox also has significant therapeutic applications in neurology, treating migraines, spasms, other conditions. It's a hugely flexible asset.
Beyond the cosmetic side, we also see a very heavy, sustained investment in these high-value specialty fields like hematology and oncology. This is a deliberate expansion designed to capture premium pricing and treat complex diseases.
For instance, Imbruvica, or ibrutinib, a blockbuster cancer treatment, brought in $3.3 billion in 2024. Then you have Venclexta, or venetoclax for leukemia and lymphoma, that generated $2.6 billion.
And what's fascinating here is the evolution of their oncology approach. They're not just relying on the older guard.
Not at all. They also have newer entries like Epkinly, a blood cancer therapy co-developed with Genmab, which is starting to contribute. It reported a $0.1 billion in 2024. This slow but steady growth in new oncology assets, it really indicates the success of their R&D collaborations and targeted acquisitions in this space.
And then there's the neuroscience portfolio, which is expanding beyond just the Botox applications. Vraylar or cariprazine for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder is another significant earner, hitting $3.3 billion in 2024 revenue.
Yeah, this demonstrates their rapidly solidifying position in central nervous system disorders, an area notorious for high unmet patient need and very complex drug development.
And we can't forget the important, though smaller, revenue streams in infectious diseases. Mavorette for hepatitis C generated $1.3 billion, and they still maintain older drugs like Coletra and Norvir in their portfolio, which are crucial for global health applications.
And looking ahead, I mean, the company is not resting on its current blockbusters. The commitment to pipeline development is crucial. They are heavily focusing on advanced treatments for neurologic diseases. This includes drug candidates for Parkinson's disease like Vyalev and Tapapadon.
Right.
We also see continued research commitment to eye care and cystic fibrosis. This expansion is designed to ensure that if Skyrizi or Rinvoq face their own patent challenges a decade from now, the next round of successors is already waiting in the wings.
So the snapshot is absolutely clear. They are a financial machine generating over $56 billion a year. They successfully navigated the patent cliff of their former top drug by strategically substituting it with two new autoimmune blockbusters, Skyrizi and Rinvoq. And they leveraged M&A to diversify rapidly and deeply into aesthetics, specialty oncology, and neuroscience.
But surviving is expensive.
It is. And that colossal revenue base only exists because of their M&A playbook. So how exactly did they execute that diversification so quickly?
That brings us to the industrial scale of their acquisition strategy. AbbVie's history isn't just defined by internal research, it's defined by an aggressive, almost constant cycle of mergers and acquisitions. This strategy is fundamental.
It has to be.
If you need to replace a massive, multi-billion-dollar revenue stream quickly, you don't wait a decade for internal R&D to deliver. You buy a successful phase 3 drug or a proven company, and you integrate it immediately.
Let's trace a timeline, because it really highlights how systematically they built their therapeutic areas beyond that autoimmune core they inherited from Abbott. Right after the spinoff, they started looking for strategic buys. In 2014, they acquired Imovent,
A startup, right?
a startup out of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, focused on biotherapeutics for cancer, infectious disease, and autoimmune disorders. It was a relatively small acquisition, but it was an early signal that their focus was shifting outward for growth.
The real game changer came in 2015 with the acquisition of the oncology firm Pharmacyclics. This was a significant high-stakes purchase. It cost $21 billion.
$21 billion.
And the key asset here was ibrutinib, or Imbruvica, a highly valuable treatment for blood cancers. This acquisition was foundational for their oncology portfolio. It instantly made them a major player in the space.
What's fascinating about that $21 billion deal is that it wasn't an easy win. The sources show that AstraZeneca was also bidding fiercely for Pharmacyclics.
Bidding war.
Exactly. And that tells you two things. First, AbbVie was willing to pay a massive premium to secure a proven asset. And second, there's fierce, high-stakes competition among the largest pharmaceutical firms for late-stage oncology drugs because the margins are just so high.
And they doubled down on oncology a year later. In 2016, AbbVie acquired Stemcentrx for up to $9.8 billion. This signaled a clear, sustained, and relentless commitment to building a major presence in cancer treatment.
So they spent huge amounts of capital.
Almost $31 billion in 2 years just on oncology acquisitions, all to rapidly establish expertise and market share in this critical field.
But the single most transformative moment in AbbVie's corporate life, outside of the original Abbott spinoff, has to be the 2019 acquisition of Allergan Plus. I mean, this deal was truly enormous.
Yeah.
$63 billion.
$63 billion. That is a colossal number.
And it immediately brought the full weight of Allergan's portfolio, including that Botox powerhouse, right into the AbbVie structure.
A $63 billion acquisition is highly leveraged. It comes with significant debt. It's an enormous logistical undertaking. But it achieved the crucial strategic goal: immediate, massive diversification outside of the autoimmune field, making them less reliant on the success of the Humira successors. It transformed them overnight into a leader in aesthetics and several neuroscience segments.
That transaction was complex, especially given where Allergan was based. Allergan was Irish, and this naturally raised questions about, using M&A for tax strategy. But the sources confirmed that this deal was not structured as a tax inversion. AbbVie remained legally domiciled in the U.S. for tax purposes.
And it's important to understand why they didn't pursue a tax inversion in 2019, because they certainly tried before. But first, let's talk about the FTC requirement for the Allergan deal.
The divestitures.
Right. To gain approval from the Federal Trade Commission, they had to make some key divestitures, meaning they had to sell off certain assets to prevent market concentration. They sold the gastrointestinal candidate brazikumab to AstraZeneca and the pancreatic enzymes Zenpep and Viokosh to Nestlé. The government wanted to make sure the merged entity wasn't creating monopolies in specific drug classes.
That divestiture requirement really highlights just how thoroughly the government monitors these megadeals. But let's circle back to that earlier failure you mentioned, the attempted tax inversion.
Yes, the attempt to acquire Shire in 2014. This deal was explicitly aiming to be one of the largest tax inversions in history. The whole plan was for the company to legally change its tax domicile from the high-tax U.S. to the lower-tax jurisdiction of Shire, which was based in Ireland. It was a popular, though, very controversial corporate strategy at the time.
And that attempt failed spectacularly. Why?
Mm-hmm.
What specifically doomed that massive transaction?
It was a direct consequence of policy. The U.S. Treasury Department, under a lot of pressure to curb corporate inversions, introduced new rules that significantly restricted the tax benefits you could get from these deals. These changes were aimed at making it impossible for a U.S. company to acquire a foreign company, shift its legal address, and still retain major access to its overseas capital without paying U.S. taxes on it.
So the financial logic just evaporated.
It completely undermined the logic of the deal, so AbbVie pulled out.
And the financial consequence of this termination was not minor. They were forced to pay a substantial $1.6 billion breakup fee to Shire.
$1.5 billion.
That is a staggering penalty. That kind of penalty could cripple a smaller company or entirely derail a mid-size one. How did AbbVie, a newly formed company at the time, absorb that kind of loss without derailing their whole M&A strategy?
It just shows the sheer scale of the financial reserves they maintained, which were largely driven by those colossal Humira revenues. While $1.6 billion is immense, in the context of a company projecting tens of billions in annual revenue, it was treated as an expensive strategic misstep, not an existential threat.
So they learned their lesson.
They did. Don't rely on the tax inversion structure. Instead, they focused on growth through pure acquisition, accepting the U.S. domicile. But, as we'll see in Section 4, they found other sophisticated ways to manage their tax liability.
The lesson was clearly learned. And the M&A model hasn't slowed down, especially as they look to secure the next generation of revenue streams post-Humira. We've seen a rapid late-stage growth spree in the 2024 and 2025 timeframe, focused heavily on securing dominance in oncology and neuroscience.
Let's break that recent spree down. In February 2024, they acquired ImmunoGen for $10.1 billion. The goal here was very specific: expedite entry into the ovarian cancer treatment market via ImmunoGen's key drug, Elahere. This drug is critically important because it's an ADC and antibody-drug conjugate.
That sounds like highly specialized technology. Okay, can you quickly break down what an ADC is and why it commands a $10 billion price tag?
Certainly. Think of an ADC as a molecular-guided missile. It combines three components: a monoclonal antibody, which is the guidance system, and it specifically recognizes and binds to a unique marker on a cancer cell.
It's a target.
Highly targeted. Then there's a toxic chemical payload, the warhead, and a linker that holds the two together until they reach the target. The huge advantage is that it delivers the highly toxic chemotherapy directly to the cancer cell, sparing healthy tissue and reducing those debilitating side effects. Acquiring a successful ADC platform like ImmunoGen instantly gives AbbVie cutting-edge technology and a major market share in targeted cancer therapy.
So after securing that oncology asset, they pivoted hard to neuroscience, really confirming their commitment to the pipeline they built with Allergan.
Precisely. In August 2024, they acquired Cerevel Therapeutics for $8.7 billion, specifically to expand the drug pipeline in neurological conditions. Just 2 months later, in October 2024, they followed up with the acquisition of Aliada Therapeutics for $1.4 billion, further boosting that neuroscience pipeline.
So back-to-back deals.
This quick succession shows a deliberate, urgent effort to establish a dominant position in treating neurological conditions, knowing that this field represents enormous future growth.
And they're still fine-tuning the foundational autoimmune space. In January 2025, they acquired Nimble Therapeutics, a Roche spin-out focusing on oral peptide treatments in the autoimmune area for $200 million.
And that acquisition, though it's smaller in scale than the others, it demonstrates their continued interest in next-generation therapies for their founding therapeutic area, using next-generation delivery methods like oral peptides.
What's critical for you, the listener, to understand is the sheer corporate complexity that's inherited through these rapid-fire deals. The acquisition history chart in the sources shows that when AbbVie acquired Allergan, they didn't just buy a company.
No, they bought a deep stack of corporate history. Allergan itself was the result of numerous prior acquisitions. Actavis, Forest Laboratories, Kithera, Furix Pharmaceuticals, dozens of others.
They became the ultimate corporate curator. They were subtly responsible for managing the legal, the regulatory, and the R&D legacies of companies like Forest Laboratories, which had itself acquired Aptose Pharma and Axcan Pharma.
It means their M&A model is less about internal pure discovery and more about integrating vast, complex networks of pharmaceutical assets. It means their balance sheet now carries not only the potential of future drugs, but also the historical liabilities of the companies they swallowed whole.
It's clear that M&A is the primary engine for scaling assets. But what about the foundational research? I mean, that can't all be bought. The sources indicate AbbVie runs a parallel strategy focused on external collaborations.
That's right. While the M&A strategy is about securing existing assets and proven revenue, AbbVie also relies heavily on external partnerships to drive basic research and spread the immense financial risk of early-stage discovery. It's a key tactic. Collaborate with niche experts or specialized platforms, allowing AbbVie to tap into bleeding-edge science without having to develop the foundational technology internally.
A compelling example of this is their 2014 R&D collaboration with Calico, which is an Alphabet Inc. subsidiary. The focus was incredibly ambitious, almost futuristic.
Yeah, developing new therapies for aging-associated diseases, including neurodegeneration and cancer. That partnership highlights a massive, long-term, high-risk, high-reward bet on the fundamental biology of aging. It shows they're willing to put capital into fundamental science that may not yield a drug for 20 years, but if it does, the societal and market impact would be, well, transformative.
It's the kind of research that traditional internal R&D often struggles to prioritize because of quarterly pressures. They also utilize specialized collaborations to bolster their pipeline in existing areas in very novel ways. In 2016, they entered a multi-year R&D collaboration with Synlogic, a synthetic biology company.
This was built on research from MIT.
Right. And AbbVie secured worldwide rights to Synlogic's probiotic-based technology for treating inflammatory bowel disease, or IBD, specifically Crohn's and ulcerative colitis.
And that is fascinating because they are looking beyond traditional chemical compounds. Synlogic's technology involves engineering probiotics, essentially, designing bacteria that live in the gut to deliver or produce therapeutic molecules directly at the site of inflammation. It's a commitment to exploring biological platform technologies, not just small molecules or antibodies. It shows a really sophisticated understanding of future therapeutic modalities.
And staying on that theme, in April 2016, they expanded a cystic fibrosis deal with Galapagos NV, potentially doubling milestone payments to $600 million. This highlights their dedication to therapeutic areas, even when market competition like Vertex's strong domination of the CF field is incredibly intense.
They are betting on technological superiority to capture market share. And we see this collaborative effort repeated across their oncology portfolio, too. They partnered with the University of Chicago in 2016 to investigate several specific areas of oncology. And they entered co-commercialization deals for immunotherapies, like Argente's ARGX-115. These are all ways to access specialized biological mechanisms being developed by smaller, nimble firms.
What's truly exciting, though, is how these collaborations have shifted recently. They reflect the absolute cutting edge of drug discovery, moving from just buying specific late-stage drugs to investing heavily in next-generation platforms.
The 2024 and 2025 partnerships reveal a strong focus on new modalities that are reshaping the industry. In February 2024, they initiated a long-term collaboration with Tentarix Biotherapeutics. This is focused on multi-specific biological candidates in oncology and immunology using their patented Tentacles platform.
So they're hitting multiple targets at once.
Exactly. And then in January 2025, they announced a colossal $1.64 billion partnership with Neomorph to develop new molecular glue degraders.
Okay, you've got to unpack that for me. Molecular glue degraders sounds like something out of science fiction. Why is this mechanism attracting such massive investment?
That's where the aha moment is. Historically, drugs worked by blocking a bad protein. Think of a cork in a bottle. Molecular glue degraders flip that script entirely. They don't block the protein. They trigger the cell's natural waste disposal system, the proteasome, to destroy the unwanted protein.
So it's not blocking, it's removing.
It's removing it completely. The drug acts as the glue that attaches the bad protein to the machinery that marks it for destruction. It's a fundamental shift in how we approach drug targets, and it allows researchers to tackle previously undruggable proteins. This partnership, at $1.64 billion, represents a massive financial commitment to a very modern mechanism of action.
That explanation makes the investment instantly understandable. You're not just buying a drug, you're buying a platform that can potentially develop hundreds of new drugs.
And this forward-looking investment continued in May 2025, when they entered a deal with Pharmaceuticals to develop a new type of RNA technology for neuroscience, immunology, and oncology. This points toward the next wave of therapeutics following the success of mRNA vaccines.
These three recent deals, Tentarix, Neomorph, and Adarcs, show that the strategy is evolving beyond buying the finished blockbuster to buying the underlying technology that can engineer the next generation of blockbusters.
It mitigates the risk of internal failure by spreading R&D capital across multiple specialized external platforms.
Before we move on to the legal challenges, we have to look at one interesting case study from the COVID-19 pandemic involving their infectious disease drugs.
Right. Kaletra.
In March 2020, AbbVie announced plans to evaluate its HIV medicine, Kaletra, as a possible COVID-19 treatment, quickly partnering with health authorities across different countries to investigate its efficacy.
Ultimately, the first non-blinded, randomized trial found that Kaletra was not useful for treating severe COVID-19 in hospitalized patients, which was a critical scientific finding at the time. It helped focus global research efforts elsewhere. But the situation raised a fascinating, high-stakes conflict regarding intellectual property and public health.
It really did. As the global crisis intensified, there was immense political pressure regarding access to any potentially useful drug. The Israeli government, citing the health crisis, announced that it would force AbbVie to license its patents for Kaletra under compulsory licensing rules.
In response to this global pressure, AbbVie made a highly notable and strategic decision. They announced they would cease enforcing their patents on Kaletra entirely across the globe for the duration of the pandemic.
That's a huge move.
It's a huge move. And that decision, though specific to that drug and that global health emergency, provides a fascinating glimpse into the inherent tensions between intellectual property protection, which incentivizes R&D, and urgent public need, which demands widespread access. It was a very high-profile demonstration of corporate responsibility, maybe spurred by political necessity, but it was a moment where the IP wall came down globally for that specific drug.
We've established that AbbVie is a financial and M&A machine. But the flip side of operating at this scale is the intense, continuous legal scrutiny. The financial successes we discussed in Section 1 and the aggressive M&A in Section 2 are, they're inseparable from the allegations and settlements detailed in the sources you provided.
For a company operating at this scale, the legal landscape is vast and complex. It often focuses on how they maintain market dominance and how they manage pricing and taxation. Let's start with market control, which is absolutely crucial for maximizing revenue from a drug like the original Humira. AbbVie has faced significant accusations of using anti-competitive practices, often involving the creation of what the sources call patent thickets.
I want to break down that concept of a patent thicket. It sounds like an intentional legal minefield. How does it work specifically to block competitors?
That's exactly what it is. A patent thicket involves creating a dense web of secondary patents, not just on the primary molecule, but on hundreds of small details. The formulation, the specific dosing regimen, the injection pen device, the storage temperature,
Everything.
everything. The accusation is that this is done primarily to complicate and slow down the process for potentially cheaper biosimilars from entering the market, thus extending the monopoly well beyond the life of the primary drug patent.
So a potential biosimilar developer might be able to easily replicate the main molecule, but then they have to navigate or challenge dozens of separate patents on the device or the formulation.
Which often results in years of expensive, complex litigation. It makes the prospect of entering the market incredibly unattractive. That's the strategic goal. The sources confirm that AbbVie and a competitor, Alvotech, filed mutual lawsuits regarding a Humira biosimilar. This patent fight was eventually settled out of court in 2022, but the underlying strategy of aggressive patent defense remains a defining characteristic of protecting their high-value assets. It buys them years of continued, uninhibited revenue.
And this issue isn't unique to Humira either. Forest Laboratories, that subsidiary acquired during the M&A spree, was accused of using unlawful deals to prevent generic versions of its Alzheimer's drug, Namenda, from entering the market.
And that litigation persists across their acquired portfolios, demonstrating the inherent risk of integrating the past legal liabilities of acquired companies.
Beyond direct competition, they've also faced allegations regarding marketing tactics, specifically involving kickbacks. In 2018, AbbVie agreed to pay $25 million to resolve allegations that they used kickback schemes to promote their cholesterol drug Tricor.
And perhaps more controversially, in 2020, they agreed to pay $24 million to resolve allegations of kickback schemes specifically used to promote Humira using nurse ambassadors.
That term nurse ambassador sounds insidious. Can you explain what the sources detailed about how they allegedly used trusted medical professionals to steer patients toward the branded drug?
It speaks to a profound issue of trust. The allegation was that these highly trained ambassadors, often registered nurses, were positioned as impartial patient support figures, helping patients learn how to inject the drug, managing side effects, and so on. However, they were allegedly used as marketers, advising patients away from alternatives and toward the branded AbbVie drug in exchange for kickbacks.
Wow.
The California insurance chief at the time described this as a far-reaching scheme where trusted medical professionals were allegedly co-opted to maintain blockbuster sales. While the company settled these claims without admitting wrongdoing, these practices highlight the aggressive, sometimes ethically questionable lengths taken to protect their sales.
This behavior didn't go unnoticed by the highest levels of government. A critical report from the House Oversight and Reform Committee concluded that AbbVie pursued a variety of tactics to increase drug sales while raising prices for Americans, specifically pointing to the exploitation of the patent system, which we just discussed, and the abuse of orphan drug protections to block competition.
And that congressional scrutiny has tangible real-world consequences, particularly due to the mechanisms of the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. As a direct result of these negotiation mechanisms designed to lower drug prices for Medicare, the price of Imbruvica, one of their major oncology drugs, was reduced by 38% to $9,319 per month, effective in 2026.
A 38% reduction.
Yeah, this demonstrates the government's increasing ability to exert downward pressure on the high costs that the House Oversight Committee identified.
Now, let's tackle the taxation strategies, which are particularly startling and perhaps the most complex area of scrutiny. In 2021, the U.S. Senate Finance Committee began an investigation to determine if the company was taking advantage of loopholes in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to significantly reduce its U.S. tax liability.
The report, released in July 2022, detailed the mechanism that facilitated this reduction. AbbVie was able to avoid U.S. taxes by registering intellectual property, the source of massive revenue, in offshore jurisdictions like Bermuda.
So the profits don't even register in the U.S.
It involves sophisticated internal transfer pricing schemes where the U.S. entity effectively pays its Bermuda IP holding company immense royalties for the right to sell the drugs in the U.S.
And the sources provide a shocking ratio. Wait, so despite receiving 75% of its sales of Humira in the United States, the Senate report found that AbbVie reported only 1% of that income for U.S. tax purposes in 2020. Run that by me again.
You heard it right. 75% of sales in the U.S., but they reported only 1% of that income for U.S. tax purposes. It is a stunning figure that illustrates the core issue. By channeling the profits derived from U.S. sales through offshore IP holdings, the company reported a $4.5 billion pre-tax loss in the U.S. that year.
A loss.
A loss, while simultaneously recording $7.9 billion in overseas pre-tax profit. The report estimated that this strategy resulted in AbbVie avoiding approximately $4.3 billion in U.S. taxes in 2020 alone.
That's not just sophisticated accounting. That feels like a fundamental challenge to the U.S. tax structure. It shows just how much revenue is at stake when global corporations structure their intellectual property and financial domiciles strategically.
And finally, we need to touch on the range of other significant litigation they faced, much of it inherited from their acquisitions. Most notably, in July 2022, the Allergan unit agreed to pay up to $2.37 billion to settle U.S. lawsuits related to the marketing of opioid analgesics.
$2.37 billion.
Although AbbVie denied wrongdoing, the settlement amount is huge, and it puts into perspective the massive hidden liabilities baked into these mega acquisitions.
That is a stunning financial way to inherit. It shows that when you buy a corporate history as complex as Allergan's, you are buying its past legal battles and public health crises.
And we see ongoing litigation in other areas, too. They had a dispute with the NHS in 2018 regarding procurement rules for hepatitis C treatments, a case that was ultimately dismissed by a UK court in 2019. More recently, in September 2024, they filed a lawsuit against a rival, BeiGene, accusing them of stealing trade secrets related to a competing cancer therapy.
So it's a comprehensive picture of a company fighting relentlessly on every front: antitrust, marketing, pricing, taxation, and now intellectual property protection to protect and expand its $56 billion enterprise. So what does this all mean for the future of biomedical giants? If we synthesize this deep dive, AbbVie is defined by two major interconnected characteristics that really set the tone for the modern pharmaceutical industry. First, it is a masterclass in strategic financial engineering.
No question.
They successfully executed the highest stakes maneuver in the pharma world: the transition away from a single defining blockbuster, Humira, to the new dual powerhouses of Skyrizi and Rinvoq.
And crucially, they complemented this internal transition with relentless, massive M&A activity, rapidly expanding their oncology and neuroscience portfolios through targeted multi-billion-dollar deals for companies like Immunogen and Cerevel. This strategy ensures they have multiple growth engines, hedging against future patent cliffs by constantly acquiring late-stage, high-value assets.
But the second defining characteristic is the intense, continuous scrutiny they face. The government, from the House Oversight Committee to the Senate Finance Committee, has targeted their practices regarding market control through those extensive patent thickets, aggressive pricing strategies, and sophisticated tax avoidance mechanisms involving offshore IP registration.
The legal and ethical challenges are as integral to their operation as the development of their life-saving drugs.
Indeed. And it forces us to consider the implications of their chosen growth model. The bulk of their new pipeline and future revenue increasingly comes from massive, high-value acquisitions of smaller, innovative startups or through strategic collaborations with platform developers like Neomorph and Adarx. They are buying cutting-edge technology rather than inventing all of it internally.
And here's where it gets really interesting for you, the listener. What does this constant cycle of buying pipelines mean for fundamental innovation? Is the future of pharmaceutical development going to rely primarily on this model, large, high-capital players relying on integrating successful external startups rather than relying on internal discovery within the major corporations themselves?
It's a great question. Does the M&A model accelerate the delivery of new drugs by providing massive capital? Or does it stifle true diversity in research by concentrating all the profitable assets in the hands of a few giants?
That's the core question that will define the next decade of medicine. And how do we, as a society, reconcile a company operating at this necessary global scale, providing critical treatments for millions, with the profound corporate finance issues related to aggressive tax strategy and maintaining competitive, ethical markets? It's a delicate balance between global scale and corporate responsibility that AbbVie will continue to navigate under the microscope for years to come. That's a question worth exploring long after this deep dive is over.